I'll buy the Obese Noblewoman for $1. That's what the giant Apache said, loud enough for the whole town to hear. Dust swirled in the street. The auctioneer froze mid-gavel, and the laughter from the crowd cut sharper than a knife. Folks thought it was a joke, until the silver coin hit the block. But the man on the bay horse wasn't buying shame, he was buying her life back. What no one knew was that the woman they mocked carried the one thing the railroad feared most: rights to the water that could choke their steel tracks before they were ever laid. And the man who just claimed her? His ranch sat on land the railroad meant to take by any means. With a sheriff in their pocket and riders already in the hills. Time is running out. A ranch, a river, and a people's survival all hang on a paper locked behind iron and guarded by greed. Every story begins with a heartbeat. Tell me, where are you in the world today, and how are you really doing? Your words make this space feel more human. The crowd's laughter echoed off the wooden storefronts of Kaganverd's Main Street, sharp and cruel in the bitter March air. Lady Evelyn Ashworth stood on the auction block, her gloved hands clasped tightly together to hide their trembling. The fine silk of her once elegant gown now hung limp and travel-stained around her substantial frame. Dust devils swirled at her feet, tugging at her hem like mischievous children. $1? The auctioneer's voice cracked with barely contained mirth. The Apache rancher offers $1 for the English lady. He wiped tears of laughter from his eyes with a grimy handkerchief. Anyone care to top that bid? The townsfolk's continued chuckling was answer enough. They'd already picked clean. The better offerings, wagons still fit for travel, tools with good steel still in them, even that sorry excuse for a mule. Now they merely lingered to witness the final humiliation of the foreign lady who'd arrived 6 months ago with such airs, her mining investor husband, and dreams of silver fortunes. Evelyn lifted her chin, fighting to maintain her dignity even as her cheeks burned. She'd endured worse since Charles's death had left her stranded here. The whispers, the pointing, the endless jokes about her size. But standing here like chattel while these frontier citizens mocked her, this cut deeper than she'd expected. The tall Apache's silver dollar gleamed as it arced through the air. The auctioneer caught it reflexively, his eyebrows rising as he realized the bid was genuine. The laughter began to fade as Tall Horse stepped forward, his boots leaving clear prints in the dusty street. He moved with the quiet grace of a mountain lion, his dark eyes serious beneath the brim of his well-worn hat. The bid stands, Tall Horse said, his deep voice carrying clearly despite its softness. $1 for the lady's contract. The auctioneer's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed, suddenly uncertain. He glanced between the coin in his palm and the imposing figure before him. Now see here, Horse, this ain't exactly. The law says any man can bid. Tall Horse's words were measured, careful. I am a man. I have bid. He gestured to the silver dollar. That coin is legal tender. A murmur rippled through the crowd. They'd expected entertainment, not this strange turn of events. Some were expressions of confusion, others of growing discomfort as they realized the joke had somehow shifted into something else entirely. Evelyn found herself staring at her unlikely bidder, trying to read his intent. She'd seen him before in town, of course. He was hard to miss, standing head and shoulders above most men. But they'd never spoken. She knew only what town gossip said, that he ran the old Martinez ranch with quiet competence, that he'd served as an army scout in his younger days, that he kept mostly to himself except when trading cattle. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Well, if there are no other bids... He paused, looking hopefully around the crowd. When no one spoke up, he sighed. Sold to Tall Horse for $1. The gavel's crack was oddly subdued. Tall Horse stepped forward to help Evelyn down from the auction block. His hands were strong but gentle as he steadied her descent. treating her with a careful respect that nearly brought tears to her eyes after months of ridicule. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the quiet wisdom in his gaze. "Thank you," she managed to whisper, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was thanking him for. Rescue? Dignity? The simple act of treating her like a human being? He nodded once, then turned to the auctioneer. "The papers?" The man fumbled with his documents, clearly wrong-footed by how this situation had developed. He thrust a wrinkled contract forward. "Sign here. 1 year of service to clear the debt." Tall Horse's signature was surprisingly elegant, each letter carefully formed. He folded the contract and tucked it into his vest pocket, then offered his arm to Evelyn with old-fashioned courtesy. "My wagon is this way, Lady Ashworth." The crowd parted before them, their earlier mirth replaced by uncertain silence. Evelyn walked beside him with her head high, though her heart pounded with questions she didn't dare voice. What had she just agreed to? What would this quiet man expect of her? Where was he taking her? A wagon waited at the edge of town, its team of horses standing patient in their harness. It was well maintained but plain, like everything else about the man beside her. He helped her up onto the wooden seat with the same careful respect he'd shown before Dot as they pulled away from Kagenverd. The March wind caught Evelyn's loose hair, whipping it about her face. She snuck glances at her companion's profile, trying to read something, anything, in his expression. But Tall Horse kept his eyes on the trail ahead, leaving her to wonder what twist of fate had brought her to this moment. The silver dollar that had purchased her. Contract glinted once more in the afternoon sun before disappearing into the auctioneer's pocket like a star winking out at dawn. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Kagenverd's dusty main street as Tall Horse led Lady Evelyn toward the hitching rail. His bay gelding stood quietly, its coat gleaming like polished copper in the fading light. The horse's ears flicked forward at their approach, recognizing its master's steady footsteps. Evelyn's heart raced beneath her worn bodice. The jeers of the crowd still rang in her ears, but confusion and anger now replaced her earlier shame. She pulled her arm free from Tall Horse's gentle grip, drawing herself up to her full height despite her trembling legs. "Sir, I demand to know." "Your intentions," she said, her cultured English accent sharp with indignation. "Why would you purchase my contract? What do you mean to do with me?" Tall Horse paused in the act of untying his horse. His dark eyes met hers with steady calm, no trace of mockery in their depths. "You are free to go, Lady Ashworth. The contract was to protect you, nothing more." "Protect me?" Evelyn blinked, caught off guard by his quiet statement. "I don't understand." "Marcus." "Fletcher," Tall Horse said, nodding toward the opposite side of the street. "The mine boss." Evelyn followed his gaze. There, leaning against the wall of the general store, stood a broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache and cold eyes. Fletcher's face was twisted in a scowl as he watched them, his fingers drumming against the grip of the pistol at his hip. "He meant to claim you for unpaid rent," Tall Horse continued, his voice low. "I've seen what happens to women who fall into his debt. They work in his boarding house, serving minors. Never earn enough to pay what they owe. Like slavery, but with papers to make it legal." A chill that had nothing to do with the March wind ran down Evelyn's spine. She'd heard whispers about Fletcher's boarding house, had seen the hollow-eyed women who worked there. The thought of joining them made her stomach turn. "I offer you shelter at my ranch," Tall Horse said, "until spring thaw brings better options. You can help my sister with household tasks if you wish to earn your keep, but the choice is yours." Evelyn hesitated, weighing her options. The wind gusted suddenly, cutting through her thin dress and reminding her how ill-prepared she was for the mountain winter. She glanced again at Fletcher, who spat into the dust and pushed away from the wall, starting to cross the street toward them. "I accept your offer," she said quickly, turning back to Tall Horse. "Thank you." He nodded once, then held out his hands to help her mount. Evelyn had ridden before in England's gentle countryside, but never astride like this. She gathered her skirts as best she could and let him boost her onto the gelding's broad back. The saddle was warm from the afternoon sun, the leather creaking as she settled her weight. Tall Horse swung up behind her with fluid grace, reaching around her to gather the reins. His presence was solid and reassuring at her back, though he was careful to maintain a respectful distance. The bay gelding stepped out smartly at his gentle command, heading down the rutted street toward the edge of town. As they rode, the sounds of Kegenverd gradually faded. The shouting of children, the bang of shop doors, the rattle of wagon wheels. Soon there was only the steady rhythm of hooves on the packed earth trail, the creak of saddle leather, and the whisper of wind through winter bare branches. Evelyn found herself relaxing despite her uncertainty. The familiar motion of horseback brought back pleasant memories of easier days. She watched the landscape change as they climbed higher into the foothills, leaving the dusty mining town behind. Tall Horse guided them along a winding trail through stands of pine and oak, past rocky outcrops that glowed gold in the setting. "Son, how much farther?" she asked as dusk began to gather in the shadows between the trees. "Not far now," Tall Horse replied. "See the smoke?" He pointed ahead to where a thin column of wood smoke rose against the darkening sky. As they rounded the next bend, a modest ranch house came into view, its windows glowing with welcoming lamplight. A neat garden lay dormant beside it, winter-killed vines still clinging to their trellises. A barn and corral stood to one side, and chickens scratched in the yard dot as they approached. The front door opened. A woman stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She was shorter than Tall Horse but had the same high cheekbones and dignified bearing. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat braid, and her cotton dress, though simple, was clean and well-mended. "Brother?" she called out, her tone carrying clear notes of surprise and wariness. "What's this?" "Lena, Tall Horse answered as he drew the horse to a halt. "This is Lady Evelyn Ashworth. She meets shelter until spring." Lena's eyes narrowed slightly as she studied Evelyn. "The English mining widow? From town?" "The same," Tall Horse said, dismounting smoothly. He reached up to help Evelyn down, his strong hand steady as she slid from the saddle on legs stiff. "From riding. Fletcher meant to claim her contract." I intervened. Understanding softened Lena's expression. "I see." She stepped forward, giving Evelyn a small nod. "Welcome to our home, Lady Ashworth. You must be tired and hungry after such a day. Come inside where it's warm." "Thank you," Evelyn said, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was. "And please, call me Evelyn. I'm hardly a lady now." "You're what you choose to be," Lena replied with unexpected gentleness. "Now come. I've bean soup on the stove and fresh bread cooling." As Tall Horse led his horse toward the barn, Evelyn followed Lena into the ranch house. The interior was simple but neat, with a pine table, sturdy chairs, and colorful woven blankets. On the walls, a fire crackled in the hearth, and the promised soup bubbled in a cast-iron pot, filling the room with its savory aroma. Evelyn sank into the chair Lena offered, watching as her hostess moved efficiently around the kitchen. The events of the day seemed almost dreamlike now, the humiliation of the auction block transformed into unexpected sanctuary by one man's quiet act of mercy. She turned to look out the window, where she could see Tall Horse's tall figure moving through the gathering darkness toward the barn. Only then did she fully realize the truth. His purchase of her contract hadn't been a joke or a claim of ownership, but a rescue from a fate she'd barely understood she was facing. Dawn crept over the mountains, sending pale fingers of light. Through the small window of the guest room where Evelyn lay beneath warm quilts. The scents of pine soap and wood smoke mingled in the air, reminding her this wasn't a dream. She was really here, in a stranger's home, saved from yesterday's humiliation by an unexpected act of kindness. The floorboards creaked softly under her feet. As she rose and dressed in her second-best gown, one of the few possessions she'd managed to keep. Through the thin walls, she could hear movement in the kitchen, the clatter of pots and the sound of voices speaking in low tones. When she emerged, she found Lena at the cookstove, her capable hands working dough while a pot of beans simmered. Tall Horse sat at the table, already dressed for riding in a worn leather vest and sturdy boots. "Good morning," Evelyn said, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. Lena looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." The bed was very comfortable. "Sit," Lena said, gesturing to the table. "Breakfast is nearly ready." Evelyn settled onto the wooden bench, watching as Lena dropped circles of dough into hot oil. They puffed up golden and crisp fry bread. She remembered hearing it called. The smell made her stomach growl embarrassingly loud. Tall Horse's lips twitched in what might have been a smile, but he kept his eyes on his coffee cup. He seemed content with silence, but Lena studied Evelyn as she served the food, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. "You've never worked a ranch before," Lena said. It wasn't a question. "No," Evelyn admitted, carefully tearing a piece of the hot bread, "but I'm willing to learn." Lena sat down with her own plate. "We'll start you with something simple. The chickens need feeding, and the kitchen garden could use clearing, even under the snow. Spring planting isn't far off." Tall Horse finished his coffee and stood. "I need to check the north fence line. Winter's been hard on the posts." After he left, Evelyn ventured outside, wrapping her shawl tight against the morning chill. The yard was larger than it had seemed in last night's darkness. A neat row of corrals stretched behind the barn, though they stood empty now. The vegetable patch Lena had mentioned lay under a blanket of snow, dead vines and stalks poking through like black stitches on white cloth. Beyond the immediate yard, the land rolled away toward distant mountains. Their peaks stood sharp against the blue sky, still heavy with snow despite the approaching spring. The view stole Evelyn's breath, so different from the gentle hills of her English home, yet magnificent in its wild beauty. She was scattering feed for the chickens when hoofbeats approached around midday. A rider appeared on a paint pony, his clothes dust-covered from the trail. The man lifted his hat to Lena, who had come to the porch. "Morning, Mrs. Tall Horse," he called. "Brought news from town you'll want to hear." Lena motioned him closer. "What is it, Mr. Jenkins?" "Railroad surveyors are coming," he said, leaning on his saddle horn. "Word is they're marking land for a new line through the valley. Any rancher can't prove ownership. He drew a finger across his throat in a grim gesture. Evelyn saw Lena's shoulders stiffen. "When?" "Week, maybe 2. They're working their way up from the south." Jenkins glanced at Evelyn curiously but didn't ask who she was. "Thought your brother should know, seeing as his grazing land lies right in their path," Lena finished, her voice tight. "Yes, thank you for the warning." The sun was lowering toward the mountains when Tall Horse returned. One look at his face told Evelyn he'd already heard the news. His jaw was set in a hard line, and his usual calm seemed strained. Lena had been quiet all afternoon, her movements in the kitchen sharp with worry as she prepared supper. Now she set bowls of stew before them with more force than necessary. "Jenkins came by," she said, though it was clear Tall Horse already knew. "Did you speak with any other ranchers?" "Some." Tall Horse's spoon stirred the stew without lifting to his mouth. "Many are in the same position. The government never formally Recorded the land grants from when I served as a scout. They claim the paperwork was lost. Lost? Lena scoffed. More likely lost when they realized the railroad wanted this valley. Evelyn listened, her heart sinking as she understood their situation. Without proof of ownership, Tall Horse could lose not just grazing rights but the ranch itself. She thought of his quiet dignity at the auction, how he'd saved her from a terrible fate. If only there was some way she could help alter your husband, Lena said suddenly, turning to Evelyn. He invested in silver mines near here, didn't he? Yes. Evelyn replied, surprised by the question. Several claims in the mountains, but they proved less profitable than hoped. The mining rights, Lena pressed. They would have water rights attached. Access to springs, streams, The papers are all locked in Sheriff Berryman's safe, Evelyn said. He took charge of George's estate after. She swallowed hard. After the accident. The room grew very still. Tall Horse's dark eyes fixed on her face, intense but unreadable. What are you thinking, sister? He asked quietly. Lena set down her spoon. Those mining rights might be worth something, if they include water sources the railroad needs. She left the thought unfinished. The sheriff has the papers, Evelyn repeated. And after yesterday's auction, I doubt he'll be inclined to help me access them. Perhaps not, Tall Horse said. His voice was carefully neutral, but Evelyn could sense the weight of unspoken thoughts behind his words. But it's something to consider. They finished their meal in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what the coming weeks might bring. As Evelyn helped Lena clear the dishes, she caught glimpses of Tall Horse through the window. Standing on the porch and staring out at his threatened land, his tall figure outlined against the darkening sky. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Evelyn stood by the barn, watching Tall Horse saddle 2 horses for their ride into town. Her stomach churned with nerves, but she straightened her spine, determined to face whatever came. You sure about this? Tall Horse asked, his voice low as he tightened the cinch on her mount. Those papers are rightfully mine, Evelyn said, more confidently than she felt. The sheriff has no cause to keep them. The ride into Kagan Verd took nearly an hour. Evelyn's thighs ached from yesterday's journey, but she kept pace with Tall Horse's steady trot. As they approached town, she noticed how people stopped to stare, some curious, others hostile. The sight of the tall Apache rancher riding beside the English lady drew more than a few whispers. The sheriff's office sat on the main street, a squat adobe building with barred windows. Sheriff Cole Berryman was outside, tipping back in a wooden chair with his boots propped on the railing. His weathered face creased into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Well now, what brings our unusual pair to town today? He asked, letting his chair thump forward. Evelyn dismounted, grateful for Tall Horse's steadying hand. I've come about my late husband's papers, Sheriff. The mining claims and associated documents that you're holding. Berryman's smile faded slightly. Those papers. Afraid there are some legal complications, ma'am. What complications? Tall Horse's quiet voice carried a note of challenge. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Estate matters, probate issues. Technical things that wouldn't interest you folks. He stood, hooking his thumbs in his gun belt. Best leave it to those who understand the law. I understand enough, Evelyn said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Those documents are my property. I need to review them. Now that you mention it, Berryman drawled, there might be some outstanding fees. Administrative costs, you understand. Quite substantial, given the circumstances. Evelyn felt her face flush. You know very well I have no money, Sheriff. That's why I was at yesterday's auction. Then I reckon we're at an impasse. The sheriff's friendly mask slipped, revealing something harder beneath. Good day to you. Both. He turned and went inside, closing the door with firm finality. Evelyn stood there, trembling with frustration and anger, until Tall Horse touched her elbow. "Come," he said softly. "We should go." As they walked back to their horses, movement caught Evelyn's eye. Across the street, outside the mining company office, she recognized the broad-shouldered figure of the mine boss, the man who'd meant to claim her at the auction. He was deep in conversation with a stranger wearing a surveyor's coat. There, heads bent over what looked like maps. Tall Horse saw them too. His expression didn't change, but she felt him tense beside her. Without a word, he helped her mount and they rode out of town, the weight of unspoken concerns hanging between them. The sun was setting when they returned to the ranch, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Lena met them at the barn, one look at their faces telling her all she needed to know about their success, or lack thereof. After a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Lena drew Evelyn aside while Tall Horse went to check the stock one last time. "Those water rights you mentioned," Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're more than just paper claims out here. Water means survival, especially for the Apache family scattered through these hills." She glanced toward the door. "My brother won't say it, but those springs on your husband's mining claims? They're the only reliable water source for miles when the creek runs dry." Evelyn sank into a kitchen chair, the magnitude of the situation finally becoming clear. "I don't understand all these overlapping claims," she admitted. "The legal tangles seem impossible to unravel." "Ask him." Lena nodded toward the door as Tall Horse's boots sounded on the porch. "He knows better than anyone how it all fits together, or how it should." When Tall Horse came in, Evelyn gathered her courage. "Could you explain how these different land claims work? The grazing permits, mining rights, treaty promises?" He studied her for a long moment, then pulled out a chair. "It's like a web," he began, his deep voice patient. "Each thread connected to others. The treaties promised certain lands to the Apache people, good land with water and grazing. But then mining claims were filed, cutting through those promises. The miners needed water rights to work their claims, so they claimed the springs too. And the grazing permits?" Evelyn prompted. "Those came later. When I served as a scout for the Army, they granted permits to some of us who'd help them. Said we could raise cattle, build homes." His jaw tightened. "But they never recorded those grants properly. Now the railroad comes, saying the land was never really ours at all. They do this everywhere they go," Lena added bitterly. "Push people off, claim there's no proof of ownership. By the time anyone can fight it in court, the tracks are already laid." Evelyn thought of the mine boss and surveyor she'd seen in town, plotting their course through people's lives with no more concern than drawing lines on a map. "It's not right," she said softly. "No," Tall Horse agreed. "But right doesn't always win against money and power." Later that night, Evelyn lay in her bed, listening to the haunting song of coyotes in the distance. Sleep eluded her as she turned over everything she'd learned. The sheriff's smug refusal, the quiet desperation in Lena's voice when she spoke of water rights, the resigned knowledge in Tall Horse's eyes. It all pointed to a system of corruption far larger than she'd imagined. She was no longer just a stranded widow trying to recover her papers. Somehow, without meaning to, she'd become part of a struggle that affected dozens of families, both Apache and settler. The coyotes called again, their voices carrying across the vast darkness, and Evelyn shivered, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard as Evelyn stepped out of the house, determined to make herself useful. Her legs still ached from yesterday's ride, but she squared her shoulders and marched toward the chicken coop where Lena was already at work. "Please, let me help," Evelyn said, gathering her skirts. I can't just sit idle while you both provide me shelter. Lena raised an eyebrow but handed over the egg basket. Mind the brown hen, she warned. She's got a temper worse than a rattler. Inside the coop, Evelyn discovered collecting eggs wasn't as simple as it seemed. The hens clucked and fussed, pecking at her fingers. But she persisted, carefully reaching under warm feathered bodies until her basket held a dozen brown eggs. Next, she found a broom and attacked the dirt on the front porch. The rhythmic sweeping soothed her mind, even as her arms protested the unfamiliar work. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Tall Horse watching from the corral. He approached, leading a gentle-looking roan-mare. Ever learned to saddle a horse yourself? I know, Evelyn admitted. In England, we had grooms for that. Time to learn. He gestured her over. Out here, everyone needs to handle their own mount. Step by step, he showed her how to position the blanket, lift the heavy saddle, and secure the cinch. His hands were patient as he guided hers, showing her how to check the straps and buckles. The mare's name is Morning Star, he said, patting the horse's neck. She's steady enough for a beginner. Evelyn's heart quickened. You mean to teach me to ride properly? Can't have you bouncing around like a sack of flour forever, he said, the hint of a smile touching his eyes. Need to learn to sit a horse right if you're staying out here. The next hour passed in careful instruction. Tall Horse showed her how to mount smoothly, how to hold the reins without pulling, how to move with the horse's rhythm instead of fighting it. By midday, Evelyn was walking Morning Star in slow circles around the pasture, her bonnet fluttering in the spring wind. Straighten your back, Tall Horse called. Let your hips follow the motion. Gradually, Evelyn felt her confidence growing. The mare's steady gait became almost comfortable, and she found herself relaxing into the saddle. When Tall Horse finally signaled her to return, she felt a small surge of pride. After the noon meal, Lena brewed coffee and invited Evelyn to join her on the porch. The two women sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching meadowlarks dart between fence posts. The railroad's been pushing through territory all across the Southwest, Lena said finally, her voice tight with worry. They have a pattern. First come the surveyors, marking their route. Then come the accusations. Accusations? Evelyn asked. They'll claim ranchers are squatting on government land, or that their grazing permits were never properly filed. Sometimes they'll even say livestock was stolen. Lena's hands gripped her coffee cup. They bribe sheriffs and judges to look the other way. By the time anyone can prove their innocence, the land's already been seized. The afternoon sun was lowering when they heard quick footsteps approaching. Two Apache children appeared around the corner of the house, a tall boy and his slightly shorter companion. Both were breathing hard, as if they'd run a long way. Nanton Dazen, Tall Horse greeted them, stepping out of the barn. What brings you running? The older boy, Nanton, spoke rapidly in Apache, then switched to English. Surveyors, uncle. We saw them camping by Three Springs Creek. They have maps and chain measuring tools. How many? Tall Horse asked. 4 men, Dazen added, with pack mules carrying equipment. Only a day's ride away, Nanton said. They were marking trees with red paint. Evelyn watched the worry deepen on Tall Horse's face. She thought of the sheriff's smugness, the mine boss's scheming, the surveyor's maps. An idea began forming in her mind. The town meeting, she said suddenly. When is it? 2 days from now, Lena answered. Why? I could speak there. Present. Your case to the townspeople. Evelyn straightened in her chair. I was taught how to address difficult audiences, how to frame arguments in ways people will hear. The town council won't listen to a woman, Tall Horse said quietly. Especially not one speaking for an Apache rancher. Then we make them listen, Evelyn insisted. These people know me as Lady Ashworth. Some may mock my circumstances, but they can't deny my education or my understanding of property law. If I can show them how the railroad's tactics threaten everyone's lands, not just yours. It's dangerous, Tall Horse warned. The mine boss and his friends won't take kindly to anyone opposing their plans. I'm already in danger, Evelyn pointed out. We all are. At least this way we're fighting back. The children watched this exchange with bright, interested eyes. Nanton said something in Apache that made Tall Horse's expression soften slightly. He says you have a warrior spirit, Lena translated, a note of approval in her voice. Evelyn felt her cheeks warm, but she held Tall Horse's gaze. Will you let me try? Let me speak for your land? For a long moment, Tall Horse studied her face. Finally, he gave a single nod. 2 days, he said. We have 2 days to prepare your words carefully. The sun was setting now, painting the mountains in deep purple shadows. As Nanton and Dazen hurried back to their camp with messages from Tall Horse, Evelyn realized how much had changed in just 1 day. She'd gone from feeling helpless to finding purpose, from being a burden to becoming an ally. Looking at the determined faces around her, she prayed she would prove worthy of their trust. The morning of the town meeting dawned clear and cold. Evelyn's hands shook slightly as she pinned her hair beneath her best remaining bonnet. She smoothed her navy traveling dress, grateful that Lena had helped press out the worst wrinkles the night before. Outside, frost sparkled on the fence rails as Tall Horse led their horses from the barn. He'd chosen the steady roan mare for Evelyn. Again, and his own bay gelding stamped impatiently in the crisp air. Neither spoke much as they mounted up and set out for town, both lost in thought about what lay ahead. The sun climbed higher as they rode, warming the early spring air. Evelyn rehearsed her speech silently, going over the careful points they'd practiced. Her stomach churned with nerves, but she kept her spine straight in the saddle, just as Tall Horse had taught her. They reached Kagenverd just before 10 o'clock. The town looked different in the morning light, less threatening than it had during the debtor's auction, though no less daunting. People were already filing into the clapboard meeting hall, their breath visible in the cool air. Ready? Tall Horse asked quietly as he helped her dismount. Evelyn squared her shoulders. As I'll ever be. Inside, the hall was packed tight with townsfolk. Miners still dusty from their morning shift sat beside shopkeepers in clean collars. Ranchers in worn leather jackets crowded the back wall. The air was thick with pipe smoke and tension. Evelyn felt eyes following them as they found seats near the front. A few people whispered behind their hands, but she kept her chin high, focusing on the wooden podium where the town council sat. The meeting began with ordinary business, reports on road repairs, complaints about stray cattle, debates over water allocation. Finally, the council chairman cleared his throat. Next item, the proposed railroad survey through Tall Horse Ranch lands. Tall Horse rose slowly to his full height. The room grew quiet, but before he could speak, a voice rang out from the back. Why are we even listening to an Indian's claim? More. Voices joined in, ugly words that made Evelyn's cheeks burn with anger. She saw Tall Horse's jaw tighten, saw his hands clench at his sides. Without hesitation, she stood up beside him. My name, she announced in her clearest voice, is Lady Evelyn Ashworth. The room fell silent, perhaps more from surprise than respect. She continued before anyone could interrupt. My late husband, Lord James Ashworth, came to this territory with a vision. Not to strip these lands bare, not to drive people from their homes, but to use the silver in these hills to bring clean water to every ranch and homestead. She paused, letting her gaze sweep the room. He spoke often of building proper irrigation systems, of making the desert bloom. He saw the value not in quick profit, but in creating something lasting, something that would benefit every family. In this valley, a few heads nodded. She pressed on, her voice growing stronger. The papers locked in the sheriff's safe don't just detail mining claims. They contain surveys of water sources, plans for reservoirs, agreements with local ranchers, including Tall Horse's father, about fair water rights. She saw the council members exchange glances. Before you vote to let the railroad push through here, consider what you might be destroying. Not just one ranch, but a chance to build something better for all our children. Pretty words, someone called out. But where's the proof? The proof is in those documents, Evelyn replied firmly. Documents that certain parties seem very keen to keep hidden. I wonder why. She saw the sheriff shift uncomfortably in his seat. More nods rippled through the crowd now and whispered. Conversations broke out. The council chairman banged his gavel. Order, please. We'll put it to a vote. All in favor of delaying the railroad's claim until these documents can be properly reviewed? Hands rose slowly at first, then in greater numbers. Evelyn held her breath as the council secretary counted. When the final tally was announced, 28 in favor of delay, 22 against, she felt her knees go weak with relief. The ride home felt lighter somehow, despite the afternoon shadows growing long. The wind had died down, and birds called from the brush along the trail. Tall Horse rode beside her in companionable silence, but she caught him watching her with something like admiration in his dark eyes. They arrived at the ranch to find Lena had prepared a celebratory meal. The smell of fresh bread and stewing meat filled the house. Soon, children from the nearby camp arrived, their laughter brightening the gathering dusk. Nanton and Dazen helped Lena set the long table while younger ones played in the yard. Evelyn watched them through the window, their dark heads bobbing as they chased each other in some complicated game. Inside, lamplight gleamed on tin cups and well-scrubbed plates. When everyone gathered around the table, Tall Horse said a brief grace in both Apache and English. Then Lena began passing dishes, tender beef with chiles, beans seasoned with herbs from her garden, golden fry bread still warm from the griddle. The mood was almost festive. Children chattered between bites, switching easily between languages. Lena told funny stories about learning to cook from her mother. Even Tall Horse smiled more than usual, the worry lines around his eyes softening in the warm light. Evelyn found herself relaxing too, surrounded by the comfortable sounds of shared food and fellowship. Looking around the table at these faces that had become familiar in such a short time, she felt something settle in her heart. Something that felt surprisingly like belonging. The next morning dawned with a kind of clarity that made the distant mountains seem close enough to touch. Frost glittered on the fence posts as Evelyn stepped onto the porch, wrapping her shawl tighter against the early chill. The air smelled clean and sharp, like pine needles and snow. Tall Horse emerged from the barn leading 2 saddled horses, her roan mare and his bay gelding. Thought you might like to see more of the land today, he said, his breath forming small clouds in the cool air. I'd love to, Evelyn replied, feeling more confident now about mounting without help. The mare stood steady as she settled into the saddle, and they set off at an easy walk. Tall Horse led them along a winding trail through stands of juniper and sage. After about 20 minutes, the sound of running water reached them, growing louder as they approached. They crested a small rise, and Evelyn caught her breath at the sight below. The river curved like a silver ribbon through the valley, willows growing thick along its banks. Morning sun caught the ripples, making them flash like scattered coins. This is the heart of everything, Tall Horse explained, dismounting near the water's edge. He helped Evelyn down, then pointed upstream. The cattle drink there, where the bank slopes gentle. Come summer, the children swim in that deeper pool beneath the cottonwoods. Evelyn could picture it, laughing children splashing in the cool water while their mothers washed clothes on the rocks, cattle grazing peacefully nearby. The vision made her smile. "The railroad's proposed route would cut right through here," Tall Horse said quietly. "They'd fence it off, build a trestle bridge. The noise would frighten the cattle and the children." He left the sentence unfinished. They remounted and rode further, following the river's course until smoke from cooking fires became visible through the trees. The Apache camp spread along a protected bend in the river with several dome-shaped wickiups made of brush and canvas clustered beneath tall pines. Women looked up from their morning tasks as Tall Horse and Evelyn approached. Children paused in their play, watching curiously. An elderly man emerged from one of the larger wickiups, his silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. "This is Elder Runningbrook." Tall Horse introduced them in English, then spoke briefly in Apache. The old man's weathered face creased in a smile as he gestured for them to join him. Inside the wickiup, they sat on woven mats around a small fire. A woman brought them bowls of rich stew and flat bread. Elder Runningbrook spoke at length, with Tall Horse translating. "He says thank you for speaking up at the meeting," Tall Horse explained. "These lands have been our home for many generations. The river, the mountains, they are like family to us." Evelyn listened intently as the elder taught her simple Apache words. "Thank you, friend. Welcome." She repeated them carefully, drawing smiles from the women nearby. They showed her how they ground corn, explaining the different types used for different purposes. One grandmother demonstrated the proper way to pat tortillas, laughing good-naturedly at Evelyn's first clumsy attempts. The morning stretched into afternoon, filled with shared food and stories. Evelyn found herself relaxing into the gentle rhythm of camp life, touched by the warmth of their welcome as they rode back to the ranch. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. Lena had supper waiting, a savory stew with dumplings that reminded Evelyn of home. Though spiced differently over the meal, they discussed plans for securing the mining documents. "There's a lawyer in Silver City who's helped Apache ranchers before," Tall Horse said. "He might be willing to challenge the sheriff's authority to hold those papers." "We should write to him tomorrow," Evelyn suggested, warming to the idea. "I can explain about James's plans for the water rights." Lena nodded approvingly as she cleared the dishes. "The sooner the better. That railroad won't forever." They continued talking as darkness settled outside, the lamp casting a warm glow over their faces. Evelyn felt a deep contentment, a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since leaving England. Here, despite all odds, she'd found people who valued her for herself, not her title or connections. The evening peace shattered at the sound of heavy fists pounding on the door. "Open up, sheriff's deputies." They froze, exchanging alarmed looks. Tall Horse rose slowly, motioning for Evelyn and Lena to stay seated. He opened the door to find two deputies on the porch, their badges catching the lamplight. "Tall Horse?" The first deputy said, though it wasn't really a question. "You're under arrest for cattle theft." "What?" Evelyn surged to her feet. "That's ridiculous. He hasn't stolen anything." The second deputy stepped forward, hand on his gun belt. "We got a sworn complaint from the Circle Bar Ranch. Says 10 head of their cattle were found mixed in with yours. Brands partially obscured. That's a lie," Tall Horse said quietly. "You're welcome to check my herds tomorrow in daylight." "You're coming with us now," the first deputy insisted, producing a pair of iron handcuffs. "Judge Thompson's already signed the warrant." Evelyn watched in horror as they shackled Tall Horse's wrists. His face remained calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he held himself. "Lena," he said in Apache then. "Switch to English. Send word to Silver City. And watch the herds." The deputies marched him out into the darkness. Evelyn rushed to the door, her heart pounding as she watched them lead him to waiting horses. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the night, leaving an awful silence behind. Lena stood rigid by the table, her hands clenched into fists. "This is their way," she said bitterly. "When they can't take what they want legally, they find other means." Evelyn stared into the darkness where Tall Horse had disappeared. The sense of belonging she'd felt earlier had been replaced by a cold knot of fear. But beneath that fear, something else was growing, a fierce determination that surprised her. With its strength, dawn painted the jail's barred windows with golden light as Evelyn and Lena, dismounted in front of the weathered building. The town was just stirring to life, with shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks and the smell of fresh bread wafting from the bakery. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of old tobacco and pine soap. A deputy dozed at his desk, boots propped up on a stack of wanted posters. He startled awake at their entrance, hand instinctively moving to his gun belt before relaxing. "We're here to see Tall Horse," Lena stated firmly, her spine straight as a fence post. The deputy yawned and fished out a ring of keys. 5 minutes. Sheriff's orders. They followed him down a short hallway to the cells. Tall Horse sat on a narrow cot, his broad shoulders making the space seem even smaller. He rose when he saw them, moving to the bars with quiet dignity despite the chains at his ankles. "Are you all right?" Evelyn asked, her hands gripping the iron bars. "I'm fine," he answered, his voice low but steady. "The charges are false. Someone moved those cattle onto our land while I was at the town meeting. The brands weren't altered. They were just mud-covered from the creek crossing." "The sheriff knows that," Lena said bitterly. "This is about the railroad, plain and simple." Tall Horse nodded. He's squeezing tighter. "Word is the surveyors will be here within the week." He glanced at the deputy, who had retreated to the far end of the hall, then lowered his voice. "Be careful. They'll be watching the ranch." "Time's up," the deputy called, jingling his keys meaningfully. Evelyn reached through the bars to squeeze Tall Horse's hand. "We'll find a way to help." Outside in the crisp morning air, Lena pulled Evelyn aside. "We need witnesses, people. Who'll stand up for Tall Horse's character? Show the judge this charge is nonsense. Who should we ask?" Evelyn looked around the awakening town, wondering who might be brave enough to defy the sheriff. "Start with Martin Weber, the blacksmith," Lena suggested. Tall Horse helped him rebuild his shop after the fire last winter. And Sarah Conroy out at Pine Creek. He found her boy when he got lost in that blizzard. They spent the next 2 days riding from homestead to homestead. Martin Weber proved eager to help, his massive hands gesturing as he described how Tall Horse had worked alongside him for a week straight, refusing payment. "Finest man I know," the blacksmith declared, hammering punctuation into his words. "I'll tell any judge that." Sarah Conroy welcomed them with tears in her eyes, pressing coffee and cornbread on them while she shared her story. "My Tommy would have frozen to death if Tall Horse hadn't tracked him. Followed his trail through 3 feet of snow, carried him home on his own horse." She agreed immediately to testify. Others proved more hesitant. The Mendez family, whose cattle Tall Horse had helped drive to market when Senator Mendez broke his leg, listened sympathetically but shook their heads. "The sheriff has a long memory," Senora Mendez explained softly. "We cannot risk it." As sunset approached on the second day, they returned to town to check on Tall Horse again. The street was quiet, most shops closed for supper. A figure darted from between buildings, one of the Apache boys. Evelyn recognized from the camp. He pressed a folded paper into her hand and vanished before she could speak. Under the glow of a street lamp, she opened it. The message was brief, written in careful schoolhouse script. "I know way into sheriff's office. through loose boards behind jail, can get mining papers. Meet at Old Cottonwood tomorrow night. Nanton, Evelyn's heart pounded. She showed the note to Lena, who read it with narrowed eyes. It's risky, Lena whispered. If they catch anyone breaking. In double quotes, but those papers could save everything, Evelyn replied. The land, the water rights, Tall Horse's freedom. She straightened her shoulders. I have to try. Lena studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. We'll need a distraction for the night guard. I might have an idea about that. They walked back to their horses, plans taking shape in whispered conversation. The setting sun painted long shadows across the street, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed off the canyon walls, a reminder of what was at stake. Behind them, light still burned in the jail window where Tall Horse waited, strong and patient as the mountains themselves. Evelyn touched the note in her pocket, hope flickering like a candle flame in her chest. They had allies. They had a plan. Now they just needed courage enough to see it through. The moon rose over the ridge as they rode home, its light turning the trail to silver. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, they had direction. Sometimes, Evelyn reflected, that was enough to keep going. The old cottonwood creaked in the evening breeze, its bare branches casting spidery shadows in the starlight. Evelyn and Lena waited beneath it, their dark cloaks blending with the night. A soft whistle, like a night bird's call, drew their attention to two small figures emerging from the shadows. Nanton and Dazen approached silently, their moccasins making no sound on the packed earth. The older boy Nanton spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. We watched the sheriff's office for 2 days now. The roof has loose vent, right above where he keeps the safe. Dazen nodded eagerly. We can fit through easy. Done it before, when looking for lost cat belonging to widow. Martinez. Evelyn's heart quickened at their confidence. Are you certain about the safe's location? Yes, Nanton replied. We see sheriff open it every morning through window. Big iron box, green paint peeling off. Lena crossed her arms, her face etched with concern. This is dangerous work. If you're caught, we won't be, Dazen assured her, a hint of pride in his voice. We move quiet as rabbits. They spent the next hour planning every detail. The boys would enter 2 nights hence, when the moon was fuller and the night deputy usually dozed off. Lena would keep watch from the alley behind the office, while Evelyn waited with the horses near the livery stable. Remember, Nanton said seriously, papers will be in leather folder with gold letters. Your husband's name. The next 2 days crawled by like molasses in winter. Evelyn kept busy with ranch chores, trying to still her nervous hands. She checked on the horses they would ride, ensuring their hooves were wrapped in cloth to muffle their steps. Lena prepared small bundles of dried meat and hard biscuits just in case they needed to ride far. When the appointed night arrived, the sky was clear and star-studded. A 3/4 moon hung like a silver coin, providing just enough light to see by. They rode into town well after midnight, taking the back trails to avoid the main street. Lena positioned herself in the shadowy alley, a shawl drawn over her dark hair. She would signal with an owl's call if anyone approached. Evelyn led the horses behind the livery stable, her pulse thrumming in her ears. The boys moved like shadows across the moonlit yard. Nanton gave his younger cousin a boost onto a rein. Barrel then scrambled up after him. They crossed the roof with practiced ease, their bodies low against the weathered shingles. Evelyn held her breath as they worked the vent cover loose. It came free without a sound, and both boys disappeared into the darkness beyond. The minutes stretched like hours as she waited, every distant dog bark or creak of wood making her jump. Finally, 2 small shapes emerged from the vent. They replaced the cover carefully, then made their way down as silently as they had climbed. Up, Nanton clutched something wrapped in oilcloth to his chest. They regrouped in the deep shadows beside the livery. Nanton handed the package to Evelyn with a triumphant grin. Found them right where we thought. Sheriff never even stirred in his chair. Evelyn's hands trembled as she tucked the precious bundle into her bodice. The papers crinkled against her ribs, but the sound was muffled by the thick fabric of her dress. Lena joined them, and they all mounted up, the horses' wrapped hooves falling quietly on the packed earth. They rode home under the vast, star-scattered sky, the moon lighting their way across the sleeping landscape. No one spoke until they were well beyond the town limits. Even then, their conversation was limited to occasional whispers. Checking that everyone was all right. Back at the ranch, Evelyn's fingers shook as she pried up the loose floorboard in her room. The oilcloth package fit perfectly in the space beneath. She replaced the board, then sat on her bed, heart still racing from the night's work. Sleep came in fits and starts. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the papers hidden beneath her feet. What secrets did they hold? Could they truly help free Tall Horse and protect his land? The questions chased themselves through her mind until dawn began to paint the eastern sky in pale gold dot as she finally drifted off. Evelyn's last thoughts were of Tall Horse in his cell and the hope that these documents might be the key to his freedom. The sound of morning birds began to filter through her window, a reminder that a new day was beginning, one that might change everything. The first rays of sunlight painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold as Evelyn mounted her roan. Mare. She had barely slept, the weight of the hidden documents and Tall Horse's imprisonment heavy on her mind. The morning air bit with early spring chill as she guided her horse down the winding trail toward Reverend Harris's modest cabin. The circuit preacher's home sat nestled against a stand of ponderosa pines, smoke already curling from the stone chimney. As Evelyn approached, she saw the Reverend on his porch, reading from his worn Bible in the growing light. He looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, setting aside his book and rising to greet her. "Lady Ashworth," he called, his voice carrying across the yard. "You're abroad mighty early this morning." Evelyn dismounted carefully, her legs still somewhat unsteady after days of riding practice. "Reverend Harris, I must speak with you about a matter of great importance." The preacher's weathered face grew serious as he gestured toward his door. "Come inside where it's warm. I've coffee on the stove." Inside, the cabin was simple but tidy, warmed by a pot-bellied stove. Reverend Harris poured 2 cups of strong coffee into tin mugs and settled into a straight-backed chair. "Now then, what brings you out at dawn?" Evelyn wrapped her fingers around the warm mug. "It's about Tall Horse. These false charges of cattle theft, they're meant to discredit him before the railroad can seize his land." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We need character witnesses for his hearing, someone the townsfolk respect." The Reverend nodded slowly, his gray eyes thoughtful. "I've known Tall Horse for 15 years. Watched him take over that ranch when his father passed. Never knew him to take what wasn't his." "Then you'll speak for him?" Evelyn leaned forward, hope rising in her chest. "Course I will." Reverend Harris set down his cup firmly. "Been meaning to say something about how this railroad business has been handled anyway. Ain't right, how they're pushing folks off their land." Relief flooded through Evelyn. She reached across to grasp his weathered hand. "Thank you, Reverend. Your words will carry weight with the court." After leaving the Reverend's cabin, Evelyn rode into town. The telegraph office had just opened, its operator yawning as he unlocked the door. Inside, Evelyn carefully composed her message to Judge Franklin in the county seat. "Urgent stop request hearing for Tall Horse stop false. Charges of cattle theft stop railroad land claim pending stop witnesses ready to testify stop. Respectfully, Lady Evelyn Ashworth, stay OPD." Operator's fingers clicked out the message, the sound sharp in the quiet morning air. Evelyn paid the fee and rode back to the ranch, where Lena waited on the porch. "Did the Reverend agree?" Lena asked as Evelyn dismounted. "Yes, and I've sent the telegram. Now we wait." Evelyn followed Lena inside, where breakfast smells filled the kitchen. They spent the morning gathering statements from neighbors who had benefited from Tall Horse's help over the years. Old widow Martinez described how he had fixed her roof before winter. The Cooper family told of how he had helped search for their lost child in a snowstorm. Each story painted a picture of a man respected and trusted by his community. That afternoon, the telegraph boy rode out to the ranch, waving a yellow paper. Evelyn's hands trembled as she unfolded the reply. "Hearing granted, stop 3 days hence, stop. 10 o'clock morning, stop." Judge Franklin, presiding STOP Lena, read the message over Evelyn's shoulder and squeezed her arm. 3 days. "We'd best get to work." They spent the evening at the kitchen table, carefully writing out each witness statement. Lena's neat hand recorded their words on good paper, while Evelyn organized them by importance. As the lamp burned low, they began the delicate work of sewing the papers into the lining of Evelyn's leather satchel. "The sheriff can't search a lady's personal bag without cause," Lena explained as she stitched. "And even if he tries, he won't find these easily." The next day brought a flurry of quiet activity to the ranch. Neighbors dropped by with more statements, speaking in hushed voices about the railroad men seen measuring distances near their properties. The Apache family sent word through their children that they too would stand as witnesses to Tall Horse's character. Evelyn wrote everything down, her fingers stained with ink. The satchel grew heavier with hidden papers, each one a thread of hope for Tall Horse's freedom. They worked with determined focus, knowing that in 3 days' time they would have their chance to prove his innocence. As evening approached, Evelyn sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The weight of responsibility settled around her shoulders like a shawl. In her mind, she could see Tall Horse in his cell, waiting with the patience that seemed as much a part of him as his height or his quiet strength. She would not let him wait in vain. Inside, she heard Lena humming softly as she prepared supper, the familiar sound of life continuing despite their troubles. The ranch had become more than just a shelter to Evelyn. It had become home, and she would fight with everything she had to protect it and its people. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, one by one, like distant beacons of hope. 3 days until the hearing. 3 days to prepare their defense. 3 days that could change everything. Dawn broke over Kagan Verde with a crisp, early spring brightness. Evelyn stood before the small mirror in her room, adjusting the collar of her best remaining gown. The dark blue silk, though showing signs of wear at the cuffs, still held its dignity. She pinned her hair carefully, remembering how her mother had taught her that appearance could be armor in difficult moments. The leather satchel sat heavily on her bed, its hidden contents representing their best hope for justice. She lifted it carefully, testing the stitching that concealed their precious documents. Lena's handiwork held firm. Downstairs, she found Lena already dressed in her Sunday best, pouring coffee into tin cups. "Drink something," Lena insisted, pushing a cup toward her. "Could be a long morning." They heard hoofbeats approaching outside. Through the window, Evelyn saw Reverend Harris riding up, followed by the Whitman brothers and old Jim Cooper, the ranchers who had agreed to testify. The men dismounted, their faces serious beneath their Sunday hats. "Morning, ladies," Reverend Harris called as they stepped onto the porch. "Thought we might all ride in together." The small group mounted up, their horses' breath steaming in the cool morning air. Evelyn settled onto her roan mare, now comfortable enough to manage her reins one-handed while holding her satchel. They rode toward town in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. The courthouse, really just the largest room in the town hall, was already filling when they arrived. Railroad men in sharp suits clustered near the front, their watches glinting as they checked the time. Townsfolk filled the wooden benches, their whispers echoing off the high ceiling. The sheriff stood near his desk, thumbing through papers. With studied importance, Evelyn's heart clenched when she saw a tall horse being led in, his hands bound before him. Despite 3 days in a cell, he carried himself with unwavering dignity. His eyes met hers briefly, and she saw in them not defeat, but calm determination. Judge Franklin entered from his chambers, his black robe swishing as he took his seat. The room fell silent. "Court is now in session," he announced, his voice carrying to the back walls. "Case of the Territory versus Tall Horse, charge of cattle theft. Prosecutor, you may begin." The prosecutor, a thin man with oiled hair who had arrived with the railroad men, rose smoothly. "Your Honor, we will prove that the defendant stole 3 steers from the Barracks Ranch on the night of March 15th. We have witnesses who will testify to seeing suspicious activity near the property line." For the next hour, the prosecutor presented his case. 2 ranch hands claimed they had seen a tall figure moving cattle in the darkness. The sheriff testified about suspicious tracks leading toward Tall Horse's land. Each statement seemed carefully crafted to suggest guilt while offering no solid proof. When the defense's turn came, Reverend Harris spoke first. He described 15 years of knowing Tall Horse, of seeing him help neighbors without asking payment, of watching him manage his ranch with honesty and care. The Whitman brothers testified next, explaining how Tall Horse had helped them survive their first winter on their homestead. Then Jim Cooper stood, his weathered hands gripping his hat. "Those 3 steers they're talking about, I sold them to Tall Horse myself last fall. Got the bill of sale right here." He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. "That's my mark, and that's his, fair and square." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The prosecutor's face tightened as Judge Franklin examined the bill of sale. "Your Honor," Evelyn said, rising from her seat. Her voice was clear and steady, carrying the authority she had learned in London's drawing rooms. "I have evidence that bears directly on this case." The judge nodded for her to approach. Evelyn opened her satchel, removing the carefully preserved mining rights papers. "These documents show that my late husband's mining claim included water rights to 3 springs in the territory. Rights that by law cannot be superseded by railroad claims." Gasps rippled through the room as she handed the papers to the judge. The railroad men leaned forward, their faces darkening. "Furthermore," Evelyn continued, her heart pounding but her voice never wavering, "it is my intention to deed these rights to the Apache community represented by Tall Horse. This will ensure their access to water cannot be denied by anyone." Courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Judge Franklin raised his gavel for silence, studying the documents with careful attention. The prosecutor jumped to his feet, sputtering objections, but the judge waved him quiet. "These papers appear to be in order," Judge Franklin announced after several tense minutes. "The water rights are legally binding. As to the cattle theft charge?" He looked directly at the prosecutor. "The defense has provided clear proof of legitimate purchase. Case dismissed." The sheriff moved to unlock Tall Horse's restraints. Evelyn watched as he rubbed his wrists, his expression unchanged but his eyes holding a quiet light of triumph. Lena was already moving toward her brother, dignity barely containing her joy. The railroad men stormed out, their expensive boots clicking angrily on the wooden floor. Townspeople gathered around Tall Horse, offering handshakes and congratulations. Through the press of bodies, his eyes found Evelyn's again. In them, she saw something new, a warmth that made her cheeks flush and her heart skip. Reverend Harris touched her elbow gently. "That was a brave thing you did, my dear, and a right thing." Evelyn clutched her empty satchel, watching as Tall Horse embraced his sister. "It was the only thing to do," she replied softly. "The land and water belong to those who love them most." Through the courthouse windows, sunlight streamed in, catching the dust motes and golden beams. Outside, horses stamped and whickered, and the spring wind carried the promise of new beginnings. Judge Franklin's gavel cracked against the wooden block. "This court will take a 30-minute recess to review these documents in detail." The sound echoed through the suddenly quiet courtroom. "We'll reconvene at 11 o'clock sharp." People filed out of the stuffy room into the bright spring morning. Evelyn stood near the courthouse steps, her empty satchel clutched tight against her side. Her heart was still racing from presenting the evidence, but a different kind of nervousness fluttered in her chest when she saw Tall Horse approaching. He moved carefully through the crowd, some townsfolk stepping aside respectfully while others turned away. His boots made hollow sounds on the wooden steps as he came to stand before her. Up close, she could see the shadows of sleepless nights under his eyes, but his gaze was clear and direct. "Miss Evelyn," he said softly, using the title she'd asked him to use instead of lady, "I need to thank you proper for what you've done." "Please don't," she replied, feeling her cheeks warm. "I only did what was right." Tall Horse shook his head slowly. "Not many would see it that way. Not many would risk what you did to help my people." He glanced toward the street where several railroad men stood in a tight cluster, their faces dark with anger. "But you should know, they won't. Let this go easy." "What do you mean?" "Railroad men, they're like wolves that taste blood. They'll keep coming until they get what they want or somebody stops them for good." His voice dropped lower. "They've got money to buy new judges, new laws even. This victory, it might not last." Evelyn squared her shoulders, lifting her chin, in the way that had once made London drawing rooms fall silent. "Then we'll fight them again, and again after that if we must." Something sparked in Tall Horse's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or admiration. Before she could respond, the courthouse bell began to ring, calling everyone back inside. The crowd pressed around them, forcing them to step apart. But as they moved toward the doors, Tall Horse's hand brushed hers briefly. "Thank you," he whispered, "for believing in justice." Inside, the air felt heavier than before. Judge Franklin sat at his bench, the mining documents spread before him. He waited until everyone had settled before clearing his throat. "Having reviewed these documents thoroughly," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner, "I find them to be legitimate and binding. The water rights established in 1873 by the late Lord Ashworth are valid and transferable." He paused, adjusting his spectacles. "Furthermore, the evidence presented regarding the cattle theft charge against Tall Horse shows clear proof of legal purchase. Therefore, all charges against the defendant are hereby dismissed." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. For a moment, silence held. Then the room erupted, cheers and shouts mixing with angry mutters and cursing. Lena rushed forward to embrace her brother, tears streaming down her face. The railroad men stormed toward the door, their attorney already pulling out papers and speaking rapidly about appeals. Evelyn reached into her satchel one last time, withdrawing a carefully prepared document. She'd stayed up late the previous night writing it out in her finest hand, making sure every word was exactly right. She moved toward Lena, who was still holding on to Tall Horse's arm as if afraid he might disappear again. "Here," Evelyn said, holding out the papers. "The deed transferring all water rights to the Apache Council. It's signed and witnessed by Reverend Harris." Lena took the document with trembling hands. "You truly mean to do this? To give away such valuable rights?" "They were never mine to keep," Evelyn replied. "The water belongs to the land and the people who have always lived here. I'm just setting things right." Tall Horse reached out and took his sister's hand, the deed held between them. "You'll take this to the council tonight?" Lena nodded, carefully folding the precious paper and tucking it into her dress pocket. "I'll write out as soon as we're done. Here, the elders should have this in their hands before sunset." Around them, the courtroom was slowly emptying. Townspeople stopped to shake Tall Horse's hand or pat his shoulder. Even the sheriff nodded grudgingly as he passed. Through the windows, Evelyn could see the railroad men mounting up, their horses' hooves raising dust as they rode hard toward the telegraph office. Reverend Harris approached their small group, his kind face creased with concern. "You've won today, friends, but those men won't stop here. They've got powerful friends in the territorial capital." "We know," Tall Horse replied steadily, "but now we've got something they don't." "What's that?" the preacher asked. "Proof that justice can win sometimes," Tall Horse said, "and friends willing to stand together." His eyes met Evelyn's as he spoke, and that warm look was there again, making her breath catch. The courthouse had nearly emptied now. Shafts of late morning sunlight slanted through the high windows, catching dust motes in their golden beams. Outside, horses nickered and wagons creaked as people headed home or to the saloon to discuss the morning's events. Lena touched her brother's arm. "We should go. I need to reach the council before dark." They moved toward the door together. Tall Horse, his sister Evelyn, and the preacher. On the steps, Reverend Harris tipped his hat and headed toward his church. Lena went to fetch their horses from the hitching rail. For a moment, Tall Horse and Evelyn stood in the spring sunshine, watching the town return to its normal rhythm. The victory felt both momentous and fragile, like a bird cupped in gentle. "Hans, what will you do now?" Tall Horse asked quietly. Evelyn thought of the railroad men's angry faces, of Tall Horse's warning about the fight still to come. She thought of the ranch with its quiet mornings and evening meals shared by lamplight. She thought of the sense of purpose she'd found here, so far from her old life. "I reckon," she said, trying out the frontier phrase with a small smile, "I'll stay and help keep what we've won today." The corner of Tall Horse's mouth lifted slightly, the closest she'd seen to a full smile from him. High overhead, a hawk circled in the clear blue sky, its cry carrying faintly on the wind. The day felt full of possibility, despite the challenges they knew lay ahead. The ranch house glowed like a beacon in the gathering dusk. Wagons and horses filled the yard as neighbors streamed in, arms laden with covered dishes and baskets. The sweet scent of apple pie mingled with the smoky aroma of cured meat as women arranged the food on Lena's worn oak table. Inside, laughter and chatter filled every corner. Apache children from the nearby camp sat cross-legged by the hearth, their clear voices rising in traditional songs that made the older folks smile and nod. Men gathered near the door, passing around tobacco and trading tales of cattle drives and spring storms. The women clustered near the cooking fire, steam rising from their coffee cups as they shared news and knowing looks. Lena moved among them all, her face bright with joy at having her brother home and their land secure. Evelyn sat on the bench near the window, watching the celebration unfold. The room felt warm and safe, so different from the formal parlors of her past. She smoothed her skirts, noticing the dust and wear that would have horrified her months ago, but now felt like badges of belonging. Tall Horse settled beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. He handed her a tin cup of coffee, their fingers brushing briefly. "The house feels right with all these people in it," he said quietly. "It does," Evelyn agreed. "Though I imagine it will seem very quiet tomorrow. Doesn't have to be." Tall Horse's voice held a note she hadn't heard before. "You're welcome to stay. Make it your home." He paused, then added softly, "For the rest of your life, if you've a mind to." Evelyn felt warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with coffee. "Well," she said, trying to keep her voice light despite her racing heart, "I suppose you did pay good money for me. $1 as I recall." "Best dollar I ever spent," Tall Horse replied, his dark eyes twinkling. Across the room, Lena caught Evelyn's eye and gave her a knowing wink before turning back to her guests. Through the window, moonlight spilled across the ranch yard, silvering the distant pastures and hills they'd fought so hard to protect. The land stretched peaceful and vast under the night sky, promising a future as wide open as the western horizon. Spring arrived at the ranch like a gentle awakening. Tender green shoots pushed through dark soil along the riverbank, and wildflowers dotted the meadows with splashes of yellow and purple. Under a massive cottonwood tree, its new leaves whispering in the breeze, Evelyn stood beside Tall Horse as Reverend Harris and a respected Apache elder led their wedding ceremony. The April sun warmed the gathering of nearly 100 people spread across blankets and chairs in the grass. Railroad workers who had once opposed Tall Horse now sat shoulder to shoulder with Apache families, sharing fry bread and stories. Ranchers who'd testified at the hearing mingled with townsfolk who'd come bearing pies and well wishes. The ceremony wove together two traditions with grace and respect. Reverend Harris spoke of love and commitment, while the elder blessed the alder blessed the tea, union with sacred prayers and cornmeal. Tall Horse wore a crisp black suit with a traditional beaded belt, while Evelyn's simple white dress was adorned with shells and silver given by the women of the camp. Children darted between the adults. Like quick-flowing streams, their laughter carried on the wind. Some played stick games taught by the Apache boys, while others chased butterflies through the new grass. From somewhere in the crowd, a fiddle started up, joined by drums and singing that blended English hymns with Apache melodies. As the sun began its slow descent toward the western mountains, Evelyn stood on the porch of what was now truly her home. Lamplight spilled from every window of the ranch house, golden and welcoming. The scent of sage and pine floated on the evening air, so different from the formal gardens of her English youth. Her mind drifted to that bitter March day when she'd stood on the auction block, feeling lost and alone. How strange that her lowest moment had led her here, to this land and these people who had become her family. To this man who had seen her worth when others saw only what they could take. From inside the house, she heard Tall Horse's deep voice, calling her name. "Time for our dance," he said, appearing in the doorway with his hand extended. The fiddle struck up a slow waltz as Evelyn took his hand, ready to step into their new life together. If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. The next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.